Okay, so who's going to pray for us? I think he had his hand up first. Go ahead.
O Lord, our Lord, how excellent is your name in all the earth. We come to you this morning, God, and we just once again express our gratitude that you have assembled all of us together, that you are sharpening each and every one of us for the task at hand in our respective lives. And Lord, we just want to have open hearts and open ears and even open spirits, God, that we might just really hear what you're equipping your body to do. So thank you, Lord, for this amazing opportunity. Be with our instructor, Lord. Continue to give him the strength and perseverance that he needs to complete his duties. We thank you, God, and we give all the glory to the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Okay, let me get the door so I don't hear the voices. So, all right. Yeah, as you can probably tell with my voice, I'm still got the. I think the doctor said it was acute case of the bubonic plague, so don't get too. So don't get too close for this stuff. So I will be guzzling water all day and sucking lozenges again. So ECD2, is anyone here for ECD2 that wasn't here last week for ECD1? How many people we have? 1, 2, 3. Okay, well, welcome. I will quickly explain what I explained last time. Bottom line is the ECD1 really covers the material for the spring classes. This class covers the materials we're going to be covering in the fall, even though they're broken up 1 and 2, 1 and 2, because of the order of theology. Technically, these are just the latter categories of systematic theology. So that's what we're actually going to be working on in ECD2. So in other words, this is all new. What you got in the ECD1 lectures are the materials you should have already covered in SHED and the handouts for the spring. So now this is the new stuff. So that's what we're doing today. And of course, as usual, it'll be a bona fide act of extraordinary providence if I can cover every single thing I need to cover. Because if you think about what we got to do, if any of you have seen the handouts for this section, there's even more. There are even more topics for this class than there were for ECD1. So we have a good amount of stuff to do. So that said, I will do my best to keep going the whole day. And so, cheers. So we'll keep going here. All right, so with that, what we're going to do is, all of you can hear me okay? Can you hear me okay now? How about now? Okay. Okay, just, all right. So that should work. All right, I'm going to start on, now we ended last time, we started with prolegomena in ECD1, ended at the doctrine of miracles. Now, what that means is that we ended with the general works of God, and normally in a systematic theology curriculum, what we do now is after the general works of God, we start to look at the specific works of God, which would actually start with the doctrine of angels, because then we're going to look at, instead of generally what God does, we're going to look specifically at a group or a race or something. And since the argument is that angels were created before human beings, they already had a significant history before human beings, their fall occurs while Adam, at least before Adam and Eve fell in Eden, then normally we take a look at angelology and Satanology and demonology. But with our shortened 4 units that we have, I just have to cut certain areas and just not cover them. So I do have an entire class on biblical demonology and the occult, and the CDs are available for that if you don't actually take the course. But I cover an entire biblical angelology and demonology, and then we apply it to the areas of spiritual warfare and the occult. So that gets us to our next specific work of God, which is the creation of man. Okay, and what is mankind? What are our duties? So that's that's where we begin ECD2. And so here we're simply going to ask the question, what is a human being? And there we'll move forward to, as we think about what our duties are as a human being. After that, we'll look at the fact that we didn't fulfill our duties and keep them properly. So we'll look at the doctrine of sin. And see, if you have a bunch of sinners who are guilty, alienated, corrupted, and can't do anything to save themselves, what do they need? A Savior. So then we look at Christology, ontological Christology. Then, now that we know that we have a person who can fulfill the job requirements, then we look at what the Savior actually does, the doctrine of the atonement. So we'll look at the doctrine of the atonement, and then once the atonement is accomplished, then we think about, well, how is it applied? Okay? And look at the issues connected with the application of the merits of Christ to the individual and what takes place in salvation. And that really ends our topics for ECD2. And so as we work through these things, I won't be covering in class anything to do with ecclesiology and eschatology. So the doctrine of the church and the doctrine of last things. Just for the sake of time, you'll be covering a little bit of that in your shed reading and reports. So you'll have some of that to take care of. So, all right, and for those who are new here, remember, as far as questions, I'll give a time at the end for questions when they come up, just for the continuity of the lecture. I want to keep the lecture going, then I'll give you a time for questions, and I'll finish the lecture and then give you time for questions instead of peppering questions in between. So, all right, so look at page 1 of your anthropology handout. And now this is a little bit of rehash of what I already covered in ECD1 Prolegomena on the issue of worldview. But just a quick review. Remember, the thing about human beings and worldview perspective, it makes a difference what we are. It makes a difference all of the current issues that are going on in ethics, public policy. Question is, do you have a atheistic view? Do you have a pantheistic view? Or do you have a Christian view, monotheistic view of mankind? Look at page 2, and then we'll get back to page 1. Here's just a couple of issues that directly relate to the doctrine of man. And, for example, animal rights versus human rights. Okay? I mean, every day you turn the news on, there's something about environmental protection, environmentalism. Do animals have rights? Are they equal to humans? How do we understand that? Abortion. You know, when is the quote-unquote fetus a complete human person? Euthanasia. When do you cease to be a person at end-of-life issues? Cloning. Is it ethical to attempt to clone people? What would a clone be if we could create a human clone? What would be the legal and moral status of a clone? Stem cell research, end-of-life issues, or probably one you haven't heard of, commodification, and that is, can you sell your non-replenishable body parts? Okay? That goes on in a good portion of the world, not in the United States. In other words, you got a lung, can you sell that? Should society permit you to sell a non-replenishable body part? You can get money for donating your blood, but that's replenishable. But can you, so we'll talk about some of these things as we go through. Okay, as long as my plague doesn't worsen. Okay, now back to worldview structure before we actually hit some of the big biblical issues. Remember these things that to get to some of the key doctrines in biblical anthropology, when we got to get to the point where human beings have the capacity to love God, love each other, we're morally responsible. Hence, we got to be both in the ontological image of God and the functional image of God to be able to do the things that we're supposed to do. And well, last time in ECD 1, I talked about some of those issues as far as the hierarchy of being and value. But if we look at three basic worldviews, atheism, pantheism, and monotheism as a whole, and we ask the question, what exists? Okay, the ontological question. So for atheism and physicalism, you have to end up with an ontological and axiological egalitarianism, meaning in being and value, everything is equal. Okay? And of course, as everything is equal, can you give preference to one thing above another? That's really what the issue is about. So with atheism, what's this? This is, again, you want to talk to an atheist, bring them to ontology, and say, look, what's your view? Your view is everything that exists is stardust in a chaotic blender that's accidentally clumping together. And that's it. That's all the atheist worldview can be. It's reducible to that. So anything that exists, love, joy, cats, dogs, human beings, are just different. So in this case, the fact that one set of stardust clumped together as a tree and another as a human, again, by definition, it is teleological. It is non-purposeful. It's not designed. There's no intention, design to anything in the universe. It's accidentally clumped together particles. And again, that's by definition in an atheistic worldview. So that's when you can start having fun with your atheist friends, okay? And just always say, good. Now, don't ever allow them to use the word should or ought or anything like that, because those are terms that indicate transcendence, design, something normative, something the way things ought to be, which, remember, this can only produce this. How does a chaotic dust storm produce anything that's ought or should? Okay, and this is why, if you're looking at how people approach humans, animals, they're just different. Okay, Peter Singer, and his ethics, well, you're a speciesist, right? You think your species is better than one another, and this is the kind of stuff you get, you pay the big bucks for at high-priced secular universities. Now, on that, so on this, everything's going to be equal, but also in pantheism, everything's going to be equal because everything's divine. So you get the same result, everything's equal. There's no hierarchy of being with all the important problems that go with it. Now, that said, remember what's going to follow us in our theological studies is this hierarchy of being that is only really going to go with a monotheistic worldview. And that is, we've got a perfect being. that is knowable. He's complete. He lacks nothing. He has all knowledge, is all wise, is all good. So he is the being of the highest value. He is the being of the highest order. So everything can be measured by what we know God is. Okay? And God is separate from the creation. So again, remember what's at the bottom? Lawyers. Okay, remember that. So yeah, lawyers at the bottom. But remember, then we've got bugs, cockroaches, rocks, all the way up to a little bit above the bug is the cat. Way above the cat is the dog. Okay, so as we consider that. The point is, we sat there and really reflected on the properties of a mammal versus a bug. We can articulate why it's more like God and not less, okay? And then eventually you get to, man in the image of God. And it's one of those things, it's a properly basic belief, it's a self-evident belief. You can't look at a human being and look at a bug and say they're equal. It's self-evident that one is greater than the other, that one has greater capacities. And there is no other being that has greater capacities. So who is the most valuable of the created order with the most capacities? It'd be man in the image of God. And had we covered angelology, I would also make the case that angels are made in the image of God, because the characteristics that define us separate from the animals as being in the image of God are capacities for morality and aesthetics and things like that. The angels have those too. They're also judged when they sin. They're also, have a filial relationship with God. They're just a different class of being and have their own history, but they seem to have the same kind of intimacy with God that we have. So, and remember, for this, we'll come back to this. Again, I think it's just intuitive that, again, when we think about the doctrine of sin, again, the nature of the being against whom the offense is committed is going to directly relate to the quantity or quality of harm that results from an act. So again, squishing a bug is a de minimis harm. Intentionally torturing someone's dog is a greater harm. And again, intentionally torturing or killing a human being is the greatest harm you could do for a created thing. And each one carries with it a greater penalty. Okay? But what happens when we offend God? See, now we have the greatest of all possible penalties that's applied to us, because he's the greatest of all possible beings. That's something to consider in the in your analysis here. So, could do more on that, but problem is that when humans try to raise animals to the point of having rights, see what happens is now. See, the world is designed for human beings to be have dominion. I mean, while animals and trees and rocks and things like that, God owns them, but God gave them to us to use their instruments and to be used according to his standards. And this is why when we start valuing the delta smelt or anything else at the same level as a human, what happens? Well, half of Central Valley farms in California are fallow now. So why? Because they can't get enough water coming from Northern California for the farmers to grow enough crops. So what's happening now? Supply and demand. There's less food on the market, prices are up. So it really is that simple. So you've been to the store lately and noticed that just about everything has gone up and up and up and up in price. A lot of that has to do with exactly what's going on here because of animal rights law. Remember the abortion issue, and I talked about this in ECD 1. Biggest problem we have in defining these questions is today too many ethicists have a functional view of personhood rather than an essential view of personhood. Okay? Personhood is defined by what you can do at any given moment instead of what you are, your essence, your properties or characteristics that make you what you are. So, and of course, like just about every bad ideas fall on their own sword. If someone wants to say, like Peter Singer, the seeing eye dog and a baby are drowning, you save the seeing eye dog because he's more functionally a person, thus of greater value. So say, okay, if that's true, then what happens when Peter Singer is asleep? Can we use him as a doormat? So you would, okay, thank you very much. So yeah, so that's but that's exactly the kind of thing. So good, you want to live by your functionalist view of personhood. God help you if you go to sleep. Because now you're not fully functioning as a person. So what are you going to do with that? So he'd be the first to protest, if someone decided to use him as a doormat or, whatever. So this is why we think about essentialist views of persons. One is we look at what we are as human beings, and see, the physicalist definitionally says what? We're nothing more than our bodies. Problem is, a physicalist will never, ever be able to account for everything in human activity and personhood in the body. And we could go through a long list, but one of my favorite ones to bring up is just the issue of memory. Every human's got memory, but if you try and do any analog to something like a computer, where are you storing? You either got RAM or you have a hard drive where you're storing this stuff. It's actually, there's some, right, the data equivalent of binary zeros and ones and so forth are written on the drive. But the point is, every time you save something, you've got new data, right? That's being written down somewhere. So if you've got knowledge as part of your memory, it's part of your nature. It's what we call dispositional knowledge, okay? It's part of your character, disposition, nature. Where's it written? See, something as simple as that, this is why there's just no place. You literally, every second you're perceiving something's going to be written somewhere on your brain or, your left toe or whatever they're storing the data. But there's nothing they've ever found. They're never going to find that. So this is the problem of trying to let the physical sciences govern or even take the place of philosophy, theology, and those things that will necessarily define what the soul is and ultimately what personhood is. But unfortunately, that is the legacy of Enlightenment philosophy and atheist and Darwin. Is we're still trying to, they're trying to come up with a world that makes sense in light of having no creator, having no souls, and they're never going to. So things like abortion, as I've said, arguing from an essentialist view, what do you have? You have personhood from conception. Why? Because biologically, you think about the gametes that have to come together. Once sperm and egg come together, they complete a biological human being. Because you want to ask, based on, remember, essence or identity biologically, what property has to be added to that new conceptus? Okay, yeah, food, air, water, time, protection. That's it. No new property. You just have to feed, water, protect, and allow safety. For this little body to grow. So whether it's 1 minute old, 1 day old, 6 months old, 1 year old, nothing is ever added to it. for an essentialist argument, they'd say, okay, it is what it is now. It's a biological human. Well, but there's a difference between human nature and human person. Well, you can say that, but the question is, why is this cell self-replicating and fulfilling its genetic pattern, DNA, as opposed to a cell that isn't self-replicating? Well, that's the easiest thing in the world scientifically. What is replication? It's an effect. Okay, every effect has to have a cause. So what's the cause? Well, biology just can't answer that question, but we can, okay? Because there is a cause or a causal agent that is connected with that body. See, that's the end of biology and the beginning of theology, okay, which is necessary to explain biology. So anyway, these are the kinds of things that you would continue. And then I gave you the analogy. You want to deal with an abortionist and say, well, give me a better argument than this. He said, well, I gave this argument when I was going to law school. I said it was actually a legal bioethics class, and there's only 15 people in the seminar, and it was great because the class was divided up. About a third were conservatives, a third were liberals, and a third had no idea what they believed on anything. So we were presented a problem to solve. So our group was the ones. It's real life stuff that lawyers and people face every day. They had all these frozen embryos in a fertility clinic, and we had to argue and basically become the guardian ad litem for these and argue for their preservation. And of course, the other side was arguing against it. And it was great because I put all this stuff together and I just give them the fire hose full of philosophy and theology, and they're just, the other side was just going, so, and I mean, these are some of the most, and all the ones on the other side, they're the most liberal women. I think they were riding around on brooms and things like that. But when all was said and done, it was great because I gave my presentation, and the two or three ones that are on the other side, they just were sitting there shaking like this. I said, now, you tell me, you want to kill these little people? And they said, how can they be people? They're so small. I mean, literally, that was the response. I say, really? I said, I've noticed you're smaller than I am, so you're saying I have more rights than you? No. Are you really trying to make that case, counselor? So anyway, they just had nothing to say, and it was, of course, the professor was also a lib, but she was sitting there going, okay, next presentation, So it was quite good. So, but literally, this kind of stuff, having an essentialist argument. The closer was after she said it's so small. I said, look, and I went through this whole, probability. I said, look, let's say you're only 25% convinced. What should our default position be? And I gave the illustration of if you are a demolition expert and you're there to blow up the building, and then all of a sudden you find a tricycle parked in front of the building, and you've calculated there's only a 25% chance a little girl is in the building. Do you blow up the building because there's only a 25% chance there's a girl in the building? And of course the answer is no, because it's not you're dealing with potential human life, you're potentially dealing with human life. And that brings out the innate understanding that we have of the great value of human life and to protect innocent human life. So, and of course, I kept asking him, so 25%, you going to push the button and blow up the building? Are you? So finally got down to like 10%, 5%. Come on, it's only 5%. Push the button. Go ahead. And we'll all know what you are, moral monsters. But see, something like that, make them live out their scenario. And of course, nobody wanted to push the button. I say, see, you agree with us, don't you? Okay, good. So, good stuff. But that's how we got to present the case, so to speak. But the point is, see, that's one instance of how, and just bringing it back, where the rubber meets the road here, there are a lot of human beings that are suffering because of bad ideas that people have, because we don't value human beings for what they are, and we reduce them to the level of either being non-persons or equal with a slug or a fish. And that just means more human suffering. And if we care about human beings, we need to make sure that they are treated, very importantly here, for what they are, as valuable. Now, there are just a couple things where we dive into the material. See, we can make a statement as Christians. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Why? Because it's not that we believe that everybody functions equally, not that everybody acts on their abilities equally. Clearly, functionally, some people are worth a lot more than other human beings in the sense of how they have developed their skill sets and acted on the capacities that God has given them. And there are some people that, these are the folks who have, made a lifetime of horrible, sinful, bad choices, and functionally, they're not a whole lot of use to people, okay? So how do we say we're equal, okay? Now see, a physicalist can't say that. Everybody's got different DNA, genetics, but that's all you got. There's no basis for equality. Not everybody functions the same. But see, we can make the case that we're equal in value because we all have the same capacities. We have a capacity for high order thought. We have a capacity for aesthetic thought. We have a capacity, for, justice. We have a capacity for these things. Doesn't mean everybody acts on it the same way. So, but see, that's why when we think about the equality of the human race by nature, we're talking about by nature and its capacities. See, and that's how we can say, okay, we're here, okay? Because anytime you look at function or how people are acting on capacities, then you're going to say, well, it's not equal. Okay, so that has to be the ground of it. In fact, even someone who has Down syndrome, someone that's got anything like that, they still have, according to the soul that makes us in the image of God, those capacities that aren't able to be used because of defective chromosomes, defective something. So this is why you can't use just mere biology to define value, person, or anything else. So, all right, so that's a little bit. We could spend a lot more time on this, but you get the idea that who needs to control this debate and lead public policy and protect human beings? We do, because we need to make sure that human beings aren't little ones, old ones, aren't killed, tortured, or look at commodification just in as far as a couple of minutes here to address that. Selling non-replenishable body parts. Who are the ones selling their non-replenishable body parts around the world? The extreme poor. It means there's some poor man who can't feed his family in some third world country, and some rich guy needs a lung, so he's going to go get paid $5,000, but he's going to be missing part of his body. They can't be replenished, and he'll be functioning in a diminished capacity for the rest of his life, or have a shorter lifespan to help his own family. Why? Because he can't feed his family. Do we allow people to harm themselves that way? And so part of it is by protecting the poor, we need to go in and deal with those kinds of issues. So anyway, those are some of the things that, as we consider personhood, anthropology is theologically, everything else is one of the hot topics for law, for apologetics. Okay, so, all right, move forward here, and let's look at page 3. Now, all this stuff, note, this presumes this class presumes you have taken ECD-1 or have its equivalent. So, this is why, again, the logic of the categories, we've already covered personhood. We've covered all these other things. So this is why now we can sort of move through it quickly, because I know it was a long time ago, last week, that we actually covered this material, but we should be able to bring it to bear now on some of these other questions that we have theologically. For example, we talked about what Trinitarian persons are specifically, but generally we talked about the doctrine of personhood. So now we get to the question, what are human beings, hence the constitution of man? Now, the thing about our constitution, why is this helpful? Okay, because that's part of it. Is one of the things I like about not only having studied epistemology, but legal epistemology as well. Facts, evidence. Is that there's something that happens in law that should be mandated on all academia, and that is the issue of materiality and relevancy. Okay, because people in academia can go off all over the map and just think of interesting questions and go off forever and try and debate and solve them, where in law, you're not allowed to sit there and just ponder for the sake of pondering. Here's an issue to be solved right here, right now. It's a specific issue, and the only facts and issues we're bringing in are those that are material. They address a substantive element of this issue. And relevancy, whatever you bring in makes this more or less probably true. Anything else is excluded. Don't waste our time with anything that's not relevant or material. So, and you find it's a very efficient way to deal with problems, where generally the academic world, that's why, you can read a 1,000-page book, and by the time you were done, you could have read 20 pages and gotten what you needed to know out of it. What's material, what's relevant, okay? So that's why when I approach a topic like this, I ask a question, even though this was in a systematic theology text, I want to know, why is this even an important issue to discuss? Just because some guy discussed it 100 years ago in his textbook doesn't necessarily mean it's material or relevant for us. But this is, when you think about what we are, really you have to think about, how are we supposed to function as human beings, and do we have, which aspect of our nature accounts for each function? But also, big issue, in the fall, what actually is fallen in human nature that needs to be fixed? You don't want to sit there and generally conceive of that. It's actually something very specific that's wrong with us. And the better you understand human nature, the better you'll understand sin, you'll understand holiness, you'll understand sanctification. Why is it that you sin? Okay, because you want to. You want to and you don't want to, right? So you should all be going, yeah, that's pretty much the way it works, right? But that has to do with human nature. You understand human nature, you understand how we're wired, then you will understand better how to pursue holiness and how to avoid sin. So again, it's highly relevant if we understand all of our capacities for living the Christian life. Now those things I've said among other things as well. So we think about the constitution of man. Now, I already mentioned distinctions, and we talked about this in the Doctrine of God and Trinitarianism. So as we move to this question about what is a person, remember there's two kinds of substances, non-rational and rational, okay? And a rational substance has what? Rational, non-rational. A rational substance, by definition, will have the capacities or powers of intellect, will, and emotions, right? Non-rational substances don't have them, okay, by definition. So, so when we think about what a subsistent is, remember, a particular instance of a substance. See, a person, by definition, is a particular instance of a rational substance, okay? Numerically distinct, particular instance of a rational substance. Every one of you in the room right now is a particular instance of the human essence, an existing human essence, hence a subsistent, a rational substance. So that's what you are. So you're self-aware. You're aware of that you exist, and you're aware that you're thinking about whatever you're thinking about, watching Charlie the Unicorn on your laptops, whatever you're doing right now. So those are the things that, as we think about that, all right, that's a person. We talked about how that works with Trinitarianism. And so what's a human person? No, just a human nature now, or human essence. You're a particular instance of the human essence. An angel is a particular instance of the angelic essence, okay? That's self-aware, can think. Now, we think about the human constitution, and now we go back to our distinctions, okay? It's going to be important as we conceive these things that, and again, the pages 1 through 5, or actually 2 through 5, really just deal with restating the substance language and the distinctions, which I'll bring up again and explain when we talk about the rest of this. But page 6 is where we really get the issue here. And here's where your distinctions are going to come in. Definitions of the views. So we've got basically 3 views. 2 are acceptable, 1 is unacceptable. Monism, dichotomy, trichotomy, okay? And it's asking the question, how many substances constitute human nature, okay? And so the monist says 1, the dichotomist says 2, and the trichotomist says 3, okay? Now, we'll get to monism in a minute, but the classic debate in the church has been between the dichotomist and the trichotomist, okay? Which literally means dicut, to cut in 2, or tricut, to cut into 3, okay? And that's the idea behind it. Now, remember our distinctions. There are 5 basic ways that I gave you to distinguish things. Real, essential, which is, remember, trying to distinguish independent things or substances. Formal, or formal distinction on the part of a thing, which is really looking at a single thing within which you can distinguish properties or attributes. Modal distinction, which is the way an entire substance can exist in a particular way. Or distinction by reason of analysis, which is it's a proper intramental distinction grounded in a mind-independent extra-mental reality, aka a virtual distinction. We'll know it by its effects. We'll know it by something else. Or a pure distinction by reasoning. It's only an intramental distinction. It's not grounded in an external mind-independent thing. So those are the 5 basic ways. And as I said in ECD 1, just 25 years doing this plus, most people, if they haven't been trained on how to make distinctions, they default to a real or essential distinction. Yeah, that's why people are anti-Trinitarians. They separate persons into 3 distinct substances, so there must be 3 gods. That's why I can't be a Trinitarian, because you have no other way of distinguishing. So now the question is, when we get to dichotomy and trichotomy, what's the real issue? The issue is, okay, now we have body, and the question is the second substance, soul and spirit, are these really terms that describe one substance, okay? But the term would simply emphasize a property about this thing. So what we'd say is, soul and spirit are only, say, formally distinguished. Say, where spirit indicates, the Greek word pneuma would indicate its non-corporeality or non-physicality. It emphasizes the fact that it's not physical, whereas psyche, the Greek word for soul, where we get psychology and things like that, emphasizes the rationality aspects of the soul, intellect, will, and emotions. Each are truly things you can say about this non-physical substance. Question is, are these things different substances, or are they properties or characteristics of a single substance? Okay? So if you're a dichotomist, how are you distinguishing soul and spirit? The answer is formally. Okay? If you're a trichotomist, you're saying there are three substances that constitute human nature, and so the soul is a distinct, created, limited, non-physical substance. And the spirit is a distinct, created, limited, non-physical substance, okay? Along with the physical substance exemplified by the body itself. So what kind of distinction are you making between soul and spirit here? The answer would be real or essential. Okay, there's a real or essential distinction between soul and spirit. Okay. Now, monism, you're nothing more than your body. Okay, that's the view. And the physicalist, who is, and by the way, that's the most precise way. People say atheist or materialist or something like that, but really, the most precise, besides atheism and materialism, is really to say physicalism, because it identifies the kind of material or the kind of stuff that they believe exists. So here are the options. And in all of these, what do we really have to add to our idea of what mankind is? Okay. Well, it's more than just body, soul, and spirit we have to account for. What else do we have to account for? Intellect, will, emotions, and what else? The heart. The heart of man is evil and incurably sick. Who can understand it? Okay. So it's not just body, soul, and spirit. We also have to account for at least four other things in humanity, in the constitution of man. And we'll talk about how that works later on, but so those are the options here as we begin to think about this. So now, let's see here. So that's monism, dichotomy, and trichotomy. Now, for Biola here, if you're out debating a monist, all these materials I gave you here biblically, says, look, we have a soul. It's a given. That's what all Christians in Orthodoxy have believed, and biblical Jews before that, is that of course we have a soul. Of course we have an afterlife. Of course we have these things. The Bible clearly teaches it. So, but when we look at these things, there's just a few biblical texts proving these. And as I said, if we had 30 units of theology, what we should do, or if you teach this in your church, you go and exegete every one of these passages and show that this is our ground. Biblical theology comes before systematic theology. But like I said, we're just always pressed for time in here. So since technically as a group we already agree we have a soul, I'm going to quickly go through some of these passages here. But I don't want to give you the impression that when a full-orb study of this should mean that you've actually done the biblical work first, or you're doing it while you're forming your doctrine of the soul, your doctrine of man. So, key passage, Matthew 10:28 for the soul. Jesus says, "Don't fear those who kill the body, but are unable to kill the soul. but fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. Now there's a key term there, the word destroy. Destroy doesn't mean ontological annihilation, okay? And that's important to understand because, for example, when a city in the Old Testament was destroyed, did the material actually go out of existence? Did the blocks go out of existence? No. So, but see, if you think of ontological annihilation, you'd have the stuff that went out of existence. So you remember, destroy ultimately means to render something permanently unfit for the purpose for which it was created. Okay? So when a city is destroyed, what does it mean? It's no longer inhabitable. It can't function as a city anymore. Okay? And so that's the concept of destruction. It's rendered unfit for the purpose for which it was created. Now, since we're created for loving fellowship with God and each other, if you die in a state with a bad heart and selfishness and sin, what happens? Well, now you're unfit for the purpose for which you were created, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. That's what it means to be destroyed in hell. So now time's up. You had your time to repent and seek the Lord, and now you are rendered unfit for your human purpose. Okay? So you will remain in that state. So that's the concept of destroy as it's stated throughout Scripture, Old and New Testament. So again, here in Revelation 6, and again, there's multiple texts, but John says, I saw under the altar of God the souls of those who had been slain during the tribulation, and they were crying out for justice. So again, here the idea is clearly it's I see dead people, right? And the I see dead people passage here indicates what? These are clearly, they're not in their bodies. They're under the altar of God. So there's something that survives the death of the body, and he calls them the souls. And again, what we can glean from passages like this is they are shown as retaining their memories. They're shown as retaining, their knowledge of who they are. There's no reason to believe you're going to forget what went on. Point is, in heaven, you'll have everything in proper perspective. You won't misevaluate anything anymore. You'll have a proper perspective on it. So there's just one instance of soul. Spirit, again, Jesus, healing, and her spirit returned and she rose immediately. Acts 7:59, the stoning of Stephen, Lord Jesus, receive my spirit. See, if you're nothing more than your body, passages like that don't make any sense. What does it mean, receive my spirit? Or as James says, just as the body without the spirit is dead, faith without works is dead. Now, additional evidences for soul and spirit. Again, couple on page 7. Ecclesiastes 12, 5 through 7. When man goes to his eternal home, the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. So again, dualism here, body and soul. Skip down to, interesting here, passages indicating that the human body is a garment that will temporarily be laid aside. In 2 Corinthians 5:1, Paul says, if our earthly tent, which is our house, is torn down, we have a building from God, a house that is not made with hands, eternal in heavens, our soul. 2 Corinthians 5:8, I say and prefer rather to be absent from the body and to be non-existent until the resurrection. No, okay. Yeah, absent from the body and at home with the Lord. Well, I mean, if you're only your body, what does it mean to be absent from the body? Yeah, so again, all of these just over and over and over. as Paul say, caught up in the third heaven, whether in the body or out of the body. Point is, your personhood is grounded in the soul. To live is Christ, to die is annihilation. No, it's gain. Okay, so, all right, so, again, there's just text after text after text. This is why orthodoxy is say, look, we have a soul. Soul survives the death of the body. 1 Samuel 28, Saul, Samuel, and the witch of Endor. Now, I'm convinced on that passage in 1 Samuel 28, that really is the spirit of Samuel. Why? Because I don't think in reading the passage there's any good reason to believe it's not. The only real reason not to believe it's Samuel, or most of the commentators who comment on that would say, is because somehow we're approving spiritism or mediumship. When the fact is, if you read the passage carefully, the medium herself was surprised at what was going on. It wasn't her normal trick she was performing. B, Samuel said exactly what a prophet would say. He condemned Saul for going to the medium and for doing the sin. Then he said he was going to be dead the next day, and the prophecy came true. He was dead the next day, and he was in Sheol with Samuel. So the idea somehow that Hebrews didn't have any metaphysics or souls or things like that in mind is just not true. Or the Transfiguration, look on top of page 8, Matthew 17. What do we see there? Jesus is speaking with Moses and Elijah. They're spirits. So again, they're alive, they're active in the intermediate state there, just not a problem. Anyway, all of that, this is why, as general, we just don't question the fact that we have a soul. I mean, you could see there's just literally 20, 30, 40 passages you could go through to indicate these things. Now, rejection of monism, and look on page 8. Why is it we reject monism? Well, because of those 40, 50, 60 passages that, say that, somehow we're nothing more than our bodies. But also, it's not just that it's unbiblical. It just doesn't make any sense. Like I said, if you're nothing more than your body, how do you account for memory? If you're nothing more than your body, think about all these other, issues that go on. I mentioned yesterday the issue of, not yesterday, but last time we met, diachronic identity. There's a number of problems with monism. One, you can't account for every human function. You can't account for those things. But the idea that you are you throughout time, in other words, diachronos, through time, the basic idea of diachronos is that if you are nothing more than your body, the cells change in your body all the time. So how are you throughout time? And again, the argument is that we supposedly change the cells in our body every 7 years. All right, well, now if you could sort of confirm that, if you're a wily defense attorney, criminal defense attorney, you can say, look, the guy is on death row, hold him for 7 years. Well, on the 7-year and first day, you petition for writ of habeas corpus, produce the body, you got the wrong guy. Now, because literally the guy who committed the crime got convicted 7 years later in a day isn't the same person. There's completely different, cells, atoms, everything else that are making up that body. So how is there a, huh? I don't know that it's been used, but I just don't want to encourage people to even try. Because you would have a good case that that's not the same person, right? And so also we think about the intermediate state. Again, these are issues that we're most concerned about of, reward, punishment, praise, blame. So we think about that state of existence between, death and death and resurrection. So if you're nothing more than a body, And here we are in the intermediate state, that state of existence between death and resurrection. Then how is it that you die here? There's nothing that exists between death and resurrection. So now, let's make this the first resurrection, and now you have a glorified body. But what is this? That's just a copy of what you were, which is the equivalent of what? An identical twin, a clone? Because you don't exist anymore. You stopped existing. Any continuity of identity is gone. So you go here, so first resurrection, welcome to the kingdom of God. Enter into the reward that was prepared for you. Well, I didn't do it, but okay, it's here we go. Second resurrection where you don't want to be. Now, what do you have? Now you're brought and say, now enter into the fires of hell. Hey, wait a minute, it wasn't me, it was the other guy. Man, I just came into existence 5 seconds ago, man. Wasn't me. A mistaken identity here, okay? But think about that. Is this person actually the same person that did the sin? And again, you can make an overwhelming case, I think, no, they're not. Is this the same person who actually had faith, repented? We go to the bema seat of Christ, your wood, hay, stubble, gold, silver, precious stones, or is the person being rewarded the person that actually did the work? So these are the kinds of things that, again, it just ends up making nonsense out of our whole system of reward, punishment, praise, blame, because you need a continuity of identity to make sense of that. And monism does not provide for that, for anything in the intermediate state or the final state. So that's where we're at on that particular issue. So, all right, let's see. So yeah, that's a little bit of those issues. Dichotomy and trichotomy now. Let's go back to, all right, basic arguments. And again, this is where the entire Christian church is basically debating this stuff for, 2,000 years, which is the correct view. And so here at Biola, if you're a dichotomist or a trichotomist, guess what? That's okay. So the only question is that, look, which one best explains all the scriptural data? And now, as we consider this, now we ask the question, page 8, are the soul and spirit the same substance or two different substances? That's what we're really asking. So, evidence for dichotomy against trichotomy, and that would be, texts like Genesis 2:7. God formed man from the dust of the ground, breathed into him the spirit of life, and he became a living being. So, two things there. Body from the physical stuff, and a spirit from God, and that's it, dualism. And so that's beginning of life stuff, end of life stuff. James 2:26, just as the body without the spirit is dead, faith without works is dead. So two things united, we have life. You have the spirit separated from the body, you have death. So passages like that would seem to indicate dualism. The dichotomist would also note the terms soul and spirit seem to be used interchangeably for the same substance. For example, they'd point to different passages in the Gospels would say describe the same event. Matthew 20:28, Jesus says he'll give his life, aka his soul, a ransom for many, while at the cross he says he yields up his spirit. So, and the argument is, well, those are interchangeable. They're talking about the same event, describes soul in one and spirit in the other. So, or Hebrews 12:23, those in heaven are described as the spirits of just men made perfect, while in Revelation 6:9 they're designated as souls. So, or Luke 1, Mary's Magnificat, she says she simultaneously rejoices with her spirit, but exalts God with her soul. So the dichotomist argues if soul and spirit are essentially distinct, that would indicate Mary had two distinct sets of rational faculties, two minds, two wills, and so forth, which nobody argues that somehow she was a schizophrenic and had two intellects, two wills, and so forth. So that's the line of argument that a dichotomist would use. Now, trichotomy, again, you look at page 9, and for texts like 1 Thessalonians 5:23, you say, look, the Apostle Paul specifically says, look, he prays that our spirit, soul, and body would be preserved. Okay, gives a list, spirit, soul, and body. Okay, and there's three things in it. So that would seem to indicate three substances. Okay, or a text like Hebrews 4:12. The word of God is alive and powerful and sharper than a two-edged sword, piercing asunder as far as the division of soul and spirit and joints and marrow. So see, the idea there is a distinction or a division between soul and spirit. And that's some of the biblical evidence, but also think about some of the theological arguments that are offered for trichotomy, and that would be things like, well, if we're made in the image of God, I mean, you've heard this one before, since God is 3 in 1, so since God made us also in some sense 3 in 1. That's what it means to be in the image of God. That's one argument that some trichotomists make. Or there is evidence that animals are said to have souls in the Old Testament. So what really distinguishes humans in the image of God from animals? Well, we have a spirit where animals only have a body and a soul. What grounds our image of God is the spirit, right? And that's what's going to do it. So now, those are there's others, but those are sort of more common lines of argument that people will use for this. And so now, in critique, again, someone who wants to add the third substance here, what would be the critique? Well, in 1 Thessalonians 5:23, you have the list of terms. Should they necessarily be divided in distinct substances? Because the dichotomist would counter Luke 10:27 says we should love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and our neighbor as ourselves. So, according to them, we have, okay, heart, soul, mind, strength. Okay. So let's say that indicates the body here. All right. Mind, let's just say that's the intellect. Heart, soul. So, all right, so we have heart, soul, mind. So we have intellect, but what happened to the will and the emotions? And then heart, soul, mind, strength. So we got 1, 2, and then spirit, okay? So if we're going to posit a substance for everything listed, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so now we're an octacotomist instead of a trichotomist. So point is should you make a real or essential distinction for everything in a list? So that would be a critique. Hebrews 4:12, which is often cited, might note that it says the division of soul and spirit and joints and marrow. Well, you might note that joints and marrow are both part of the same substance, the body, a physical substance, and that there's distinction within the same substance. the analogy to the Trinity in the image of God. Well, the problem, though, is that you're saying what? God is three substances and who are one somehow in function? That's tritheism. Okay? And then how about animal souls versus spirit? Well, the question is, does it necessarily follow you have to have another substance to account for the additional capacities? See, well, God is a spirit, and he has greater capacities than we do. He doesn't have a second spirit or a soul, that gives him additional capacities. It's simply a qualitatively better soul or spirit that he has. So we would only have a qualitatively better soul or spirit than what an animal has. You don't have to have it grounded in another substance. So anyway, so as you think about dichotomy, trichotomy arguments, you're going to end up with this kind of back and forth. And in class, frankly, I'm going to use dichotomy simply because as we're going through trying to explain the person of Christ, things like that, it takes a lot less time to explain it as a dichotomist than as a trichotomist. So I will be using that for the rest of our lectures. So anyway, that's the dichotomy trichotomy issue. And right now, we're going to do is take a break. So take about 5 minutes, which I know will stretch into 10 minutes. But so go ahead and do that. And I need to go first. So.
Make sure you shut the mic off.
Oh yeah, shut the mic off.
Bye-bye. Couple more.
Hey, you guys. All right, let's move. Next topic in anthropology. And all right, next topic. Page 10, the origin of the soul. Okay, we've established that you have a soul. From where or from whom did you get it? Okay. Now, going to be some issues going on here. Again, normally I like to flesh out a lot more of them if given more time, but there's three basic views. One is completely unacceptable, and on the other two, the church is split about 50-50. Okay. Like most things, which has the most explanatory power? And so on that, think about this. The first one, pre-existentianism, aka pre-incarnation. Okay, this is the idea that you exist as a soul some significant amount of time before you actually are united with a body. Okay. And I'm going to pass around the attendance sheet right now, so go ahead and sign for yourself and take care of that. So now, if any of you want to write your first book, you can basically submit a blank pages to the publisher and say, all the biblical support for pre-existentianism of the soul. Okay? So that would pretty much be the idea behind it, because as we say, when we look at every aspect of the soul, I mean, from Genesis 2:7 onward, it's God. There's no pre-existing souls. God creates the spirit. God formed man from the dust of the ground, and then God, breathed into him the spirit of life. So, how does that work? Now, again, why would someone invent this view? That's the real issue. And it's simply, actually, to answer that, well, why would anybody invent reincarnation? because you find out that the same reasons that people use to support reincarnation are the same reasons to support pre-incarnation. So, and right back to our ideas of praise, blame, punishment, reward. Again, those are big themes among the human race. And guess what? People are asking the questions, why is this person born in poverty and this one born in a rich family with a silver spoon in his mouth? And the answer is, well, this person must have been a wicked sinner in a previous life, and this one must have been really good in a previous life. So one's getting rewarded and the other's getting punished. Okay? And sadly, that's the mentality, but the fact is you can account for that simply by inherited depravity from families, the fact that parents sin, or parents may not work hard, or they may work hard, they may have been wiped out by somebody else's sin and be in poverty. Point is it doesn't have to be your own. We live in the world right now, and do we experience the effects of other people's sin? Yeah, all the time. So it's just lacking in common sense to even talk about that. So again, that's why I've told you, dealing with Mormonism, since they're wrong about everything, they're always a good example to give for polemic. And see, Mormons are the only ones really now that hold a pre-incarnation. The basic Mormon view of the pre-existence of the soul, remember, everyone starts out somehow as an intelligence, then somehow you become a spirit person, okay? Then as a spirit person, question is, at some point in your existence, however hard you work and what you do is going to determine whether you end up an angel, a demon, a human being, a particular level of heaven, or a god, okay? But God, angels, demons, and humans are all the same species who simply work differently. So pre-incarnation in Mormonism, according to the Mormon Church, and again, when I talk about the Mormon Church, I'm talking about the mothership headquartered in Salt Lake City, Utah, not any of the other 100+ Mormon denominations. So again, the idea here, according to the Mormon Church, is that there are Heavenly Mother and Father are up on their own planet near the star Kolob, and they're producing all of these spirit children. According to the Mormon Church, what you've got are all of these spirit children who are now sort of awaiting the council of the gods' decision to decide whether or not they're going to get a chance at godhood or not. So Jesus presents his plan, and the devil presents his plan to the council of the gods. And according to the Mormon Church, Jesus' plan was eternal progression, which is to allow them their free agency and to try and become gods, where Lucifer's plan, when all is said and done, was salvation by grace through faith. Okay, so in other words, and we're stealing everybody's free will because God's doing the work. In fact, that used to be part of the Mormon temple ceremony, where Satan was basically, they had an evangelical preacher preaching, and with Satan whispering the doctrine in his ear, where he's preaching grace through faith. Now that, when ex-Mormons came out and revealed what went on in the temple, the Mormons went, oh, sorry, we'll take that out. Okay, good. So as they're trying to mainstream themselves and look good, but that's what they really believe. So on that, so now when, according to the Mormons, when the gods accepted Jesus' plan and rejected Satan, that's when Lucifer rebelled. And so now in heaven, according to the Mormon Church, you had three kinds of spirits. So the war in heaven begins. So you have the spirits that fought for God, okay? And then you have, so these are the spirits that fought for God. And on this side, you have the spirits that fought against God. Okay? Actually, here, I have to be accurate here. So it's the Mormon God, so it only gets a little g. So, all right, so, all right, so there it is. So there's all these spirit children or spirits in heaven, so now they pick a side. The ones that fought against God become the demons. They never get a chance to come down, get a body, and get a chance at mortal probation. Then the ones that fought for God are divided into two categories. The ones that had courage and the ones who were cowards. Okay? Well, according to the Mormon Church, the ones who fought valiantly and courageously come down and get white bodies. Okay? And the cowards in the war in heaven come down and get black bodies. You know, and according up until 1978, this is what the Mormon Church taught, is that blacks could not have the Melchizedek priesthood and be eligible for godhood precisely because of this. So, but fear not, the Mormon God responds to public pressure and the civil rights movement. So in 1978, the curse was lifted. Okay, and so now they're doing their best to try and hide that. But there's actually two black skin curses in Mormonism, at least. There's this one with a pre-existence that has to do with the Negro race. But there's also one in the Book of Mormon, 2 Nephi chapter 5, the Lamanite curse, where this Jewish tribe that came over with Lehi in 600 BC, because they became wicked, the Nephites stayed pure, and the Lamanites were the other tribe, they became wicked. It says in 2 Nephi 5, it says, where they were white and exceedingly fair and delightsome, God caused a skin of blackness to come upon them so that they won't be enticing to my people. Okay? So, yeah, so the Mormon Church has classically been a racist church. And unfortunately, there's still a good amount of that runs through the church. But they're trying to cleanse their image with a lot of these things. So this is why it's really fun. Cults of America class, when I teach on campus here, I used to give an evangelism assignment. Once everybody learned, what they were supposed to do, they'd go out and have to talk to a person in a cult. I did that for about 10 years until eventually all the cults in the area knew about the class, and then, I mean, literally, people call it the Mormon Church. Hi, I'd like to talk to. Are you from Biola? So it's like, well, yeah, click. But during that time, again, I always got some of the greatest encounter stories. So I had my favorite students, two black brothers, just on fire for the Lord. And I said, look, when you sit down with these two Mormon missionaries, I said, the first question you got to ask them is, if the curse is lifted, how come you haven't turned white yet? So, but that's what every black person needs to be asking the Mormons. And they just sat down, these poor missionaries, man. They're like, these two guys, man, what's up, man? Hey, how come not white yet? So, and they said they just sat there terrified and the whole hour, these two guys got to preach to them, and they just sat there wide-eyed. And every time they start to say something, you haven't answered why I'm not white yet. So it was, but literally, look, if black skin, they were white, and then as a result of a curse, their skin turned black, then if the curse is lifted, shouldn't you be white? So anyway, this is why you were getting any discussion with a Mormon, start with that, and it just really makes for loving fellowship and dialogue with your Mormon friends and neighbors. So, but that's a legitimate question to ask. In fact, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but so you want to take down the Mormon Church? I think it'd be pretty easy. I just need a couple $1 million. But how we do this? Just go to 5 major biggest cities in the United States, and probably only need to do this for a week or two, but like Times Square, New York, get the whatever the biggest billboard is there, and just start quoting Mormon quotes. And they were cursed with a skin of blackness, in quotes. 2 Nephi 5:21, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And just put this stuff all, these goofy, and God is near the star Kolob, and the Kokau beam emanates it from it. Pearl of Great Price, Book of Abraham, Chapter 3, Church of Jesus Christ, Latter-day Saints. Just start bringing this stuff out. And guess what's going to happen? So Laura Walton. Yes, the hype.
Would you like some more water?
No, yeah, actually I would, yeah. Thank you very much. So thank you very much. Hey, you got to be nice to her, man. Yeah, you got to be nice to her. Say thank you, Laura. Okay, you're a good cult. Thank you very much. So, all right.
The tea bag wicks and drips, so that's why I brought you the napkins.
Okay, thank you very much. So, all right, so keep me going for the rest of the day. Have some potion here that she brought. So, all right, so, so anyway, see, something like that would just put them on the defensive. And, people can go and look online, especially in the internet age, look up all this stuff, go, yeah, this stuff is weird, man. So anyway, so I think that would work. I would just love to see it, too. I'd like to see all the reporters going to the Mormon church. What is this about? You guys were racist stuff, and get all your black people on TV and say, how come I'm not white, man? It's just, well, you'd have people asking some pretty serious questions about that. So, all right. So, again, pre-existentialism. See, just like reincarnation and karma, what's this supposed to explain? Well, why are black people born this way? Well, it's because of something you did in a previous life, okay, before you got here. You're being punished or rewarded. And, by the way, any of you know any Mormon families? Lots of kids? Yeah. By the way, this is why Mormon families have lots of kids. They have to make bodies for these pre-existing spirits to get their chance at mortal probation. So, in fact, I've heard a number of Mormons talk about it as pulling down spirit children. That's the some of the language that's being used. And biggest Mormon family I saw had 18 kids with the same mom. So, yeah. So, she looked really tired when I saw her too. So, one of those things. All right. Now that's the pre-existentialism view, which again, it's not orthodox, but that's one of the competing views. And you're dealing with, a reincarnationist or a pre-incarnationist. That would be an issue. Now, the two views that the church literally is split about 50-50 over is traditionism versus creationism. And you will find, and again, I've already talked about Shedd as a textbook, and is, mostly positives, but there's some areas that, I don't agree with everything he says. One of the areas I think he does too is he overstates the usefulness of traditionism. And you'll be doing that reading in the fall semester for ECD 1. But again, it is one view. The question is, does it have as much explanatory power as they think they have? So let's look at the two. From where or from whom do you get your soul? And why is that a relevant issue? All right, two views. Creationism. And this view is that the soul is an immediate and direct creation of God. It's created pure and sinless. Okay? Supporting biblical text. Look at a text like Genesis 2:7. God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into him the spirit of life, and he became a living being. Okay? So, good enough. So there it is. God creates souls. And some of these other texts, like Zechariah 12:1, it talks about God forming the spirit of man within him. Okay? And these are the lines of text that would be given to support the creationist view. And Now, based on that, what are the arguments in support, theological arguments in support of this? What's its explanatory power? One, the original account of the creation indicates a clear distinction between the creation of the body from the earth and the soul from God. Okay. Two, according to the creationists, it avoids the Christological problem found in traditionism. That is, how do you explain the sinlessness of Christ's human nature if he obtained it from a sinful human? Okay. Now remember that. Now to talk about that, the tradition view, by contrast, means literally traduce means transfer in Latin. So the idea is, as again taking substance dualism here, if your parents have a soul and a body, what you get is not only a piece of their body, but a piece of their soul too. You get your entire nature from your parents, okay? And so you have a little bit of your parents' soul and a little bit of their body, okay? So from the moment of conception, where do you get your soul? Well, from the moment of individuation, you take a little piece of soul and body and separate it, and what do you have? A new little soul and body, okay? That's it. All of human nature is present from the moment of conception. So, or individuation per se, because the minute you take a piece and separate it, it's complete human nature. So that's the idea of traducianism. You know, the soul transfers along with the body. But if we have original sin and the corruption of the heart of man, well, isn't that passed on as well? Well, that's one of the arguments for traducianism is, look, what's the best way to explain inherited depravity? Well, it's pretty simple. I got a pitcher of muddy water. I pour it in another pitcher and keep pouring it. Well, that explains how subsequent pourings or individuations are corrupt. So it simply, it starts out as, quote, the muddy waters, the stained waters, and we just keep pouring and pouring and pouring, and we have a defective or corrupt soul. So now, so that's the argument for creationism is that, well, for Christ, that would seem to be a better explanation of how he had a sinless human nature, because he didn't get it from a sinful human being. And now, by the way, for that view, and again, I could flesh this out for an hour or two going through all the positions, but we don't have the time. See, what's the answer to the inherited depravity? Well, the Catholic doctrine, for example, of the Immaculate Conception. So Mary must have Immaculate Conception. That way she doesn't pass on the stain of sin to Christ, right? So that's by the way, and that's one of the reasons for trying to account for that. Of course, the counter argument for that is, well, you know, a little time out here. If Mary can be conceived from her first moment of existence without the stain of sin, why couldn't have God just done that directly for the person of Christ? So you don't really need Mary to be sinless if the mechanism of Immaculate Conception is in fact a genuine mechanism. So anyway, then finally, and I think this is probably one of the strongest aspects of creationism, if you have concluded that the soul is a simple substance, meaning it's not subject to being a composite thing, okay? Bodies are clearly composite things, okay? But if you come to the conclusion that the soul is a simple thing, the parts of it can't be really or essentially distinguished, and it's not a composite thing, how in the world do you get a piece of your parent's soul? Okay? And actually, metaphysically, that's probably one of the greatest strengths of the creationist view. Because I am convinced that anything that is non-physical, like the divine substance, the angelic substance, or a human soul, is a simple substance in the sense that it's not composite. Okay? It's not made of a bunch of individual things that are put together. It's simple. which actually would explain immortality. See, because bodies can disintegrate, but then we think about the preservation of that matter. You could get down to the particle. Well, once it's created, it's not being destroyed, but it can exist in that simple form. Well, if the soul is not subject to disintegration in any way, because it's not a composite thing. So again, we can give lots of other reasons to believe in the simplicity of the soul, but I think there are everything with the fact that we are immortal, in the sense that we continue to exist and we're active and the soul doesn't disintegrate or go out of existence, is another further argument for the simplicity of the soul. So on that, we think about creationism as a view. Those are some of the three basic arguments for its strengths. Now, the objections, in other words, this is what the traducianist would say against the creationist view. A, how in the world do you account for original sin and inherited depravity? Because you really think about that, if God is directly and immediately creating every soul, well, isn't he creating sinful souls? But that would make God truly the direct author of evil, wouldn't it? God's creating a defective thing? See, how are you going to account for the defect in human nature from conception, inherited depravity? So that becomes, okay, well, given human depravity, you say, yeah, is God the one directly, if he has to create a new soul, for every new, sperm and egg that comes together at that moment, at that time, is he creating a defective one? Or do you become a Gnostic and say that somehow it's the material world, the body, that actually morally corrupts the soul? See, well, that's Gnosticism. So that's another one. And this is something we really, I think, need to think about as a culture as well as a church. How do you account for the recurrence of non-physical traits of parents in their offspring? See, the problem with the physicalist and modern academic disciplines that rely on physicalism is, how in the world do you account for inclination, ability, something like the ability to do music, okay? Because how do you account for someone who seems to have an overdeveloped sense of anger or hatred, something like that? Well, if you don't have a soul to ground that, what are you looking for? Well, you're looking for something in the body to be the ground of that. And that's where what you've got, and again, there's this stuff, behaviorism and genetics and behaviorism, all of that is, again, even in a Christian view, look, our genetics can influence our behavior, but the argument is that it would go to specific choices is really beyond the pale of genetics. So, for example, what are people looking for? What is the world tried to do with homosexuality for the last 20, 30 years? They're looking for a homosexual gene or an enlarged hypothalamus so they can say, I was born this way, okay? Well, you may have been born this way, but it'd be a disease of the soul, not necessarily the body, if you even want to make the case. But is not ought. And that's what we call the sociologist fallacy, the is-ought fallacy. Even if you could, whether genetics or the soul, you're born that way. Well, if you're going to ground specific inclinations and behaviors, either body or soul, I was born that way. Well, what about the person who is inclined to committing physical violence all the time? And is he, quote unquote, born that way? Well, you'd have to say that, yeah. And that he has the, whatever genetic structure. Well, if that's true, then how come he doesn't get to act on his predispositions and you do? Say, why is it not okay that he was born that way and he can beat the snot out of anyone he wants anytime he wants, but you somehow are you get a pass and you get to act on your homosexual inclinations anytime you want? So, Again, so why is tolerance a virtue? According to you, now starting with going back to physicalism, this is why people are looking for the music gene and the this gene and the that gene. But why? Because you have no soul. See, there isn't a place for the soul to be the ground of inclination. And I can tell you this, I mean, my daughter she's got to have, I mean, I look at stuff like this. On Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, I'm a traducianist, and Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, I'm a creationist. But I look at this stuff. I look, for example, I think my kids have a piece of my soul. My daughter is a mini-me with a wig. But stuff that literally she couldn't have learned and is something that's part of the soul. For example, she has the same absolutely weird sense of humor that I have. So when she was, literally 13, 14 months old, she'd come up, here, Daddy, and go to hand me something. I go to grab it. She goes, ha, 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 ha. Yeah. I'm just shaking my head, just going, that's me, man. That's, I mean, same interest. She wants to now go to Harvard Law School and world domination, the whole thing. But that's the kind of stuff that even, she didn't learn. Those were just her inclination. Those are soulish inclinations. The idea of recurring traits from the parents, that's something we got to take seriously. How do our kids really inherit? And if you know your own kids, yep, they're pretty much little mini-me's as think about that. So that becomes at least one issue for explanation. But trying to deal with beginning of life, end of life, or something like that, that's that's an issue. Now, where is this going to come to play later on? Where did Christ get his human soul? See anything about Christology? And I'll take some questions on this stuff later, but let me finish the material here. So now you move to traducianism. And what's the view? I already said. The soul or spirit is generated along with the physical body by the parents. Okay? Supporting biblical text. Now, the same passage, look at Genesis 2. God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed to him the spirit of life. He became a living soul, okay, living being. All right, so we see there, body from the earth. God directly creates the soul of the spirit. But then you look at the second human being that's made, which is where the traditionists argue. You go about 14 verses later, and what do you see? You see that verse 18. Actually, you can. God said it's not good for man to be alone, so I'll make a helper. So then, verse 21. So the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and he slept. And then he took one of the ribs, closed up the flesh at that place, and the Lord God fashioned into a woman the rib that he had taken from man, and brought her to the man. Now, where's the mention of breathing into her the, quote, spirit of life? So, what do we take away from that passage? A, what's supposed to be implicit in the passage, or God took a piece of human nature from Adam, and all of human nature was present in Adam. You just have an individuation of a person there. Or women don't have souls. So now let's not go there, guys. All right. So yeah, definitely don't go there. So all right. So you get the idea. I mean, we think about that. All right. Yeah. Where did Eve get her soul? There's no. You think so close where God is. The beginnings, and we see these descriptions of beginnings here. The traditionist says, well, it's because all human nature is present in Adam. And you might want to note here that the reciprocity that's going on here in the incarnation, that when here, without the, yes, thank you very much. So,
Wouldn't want you to get dehydrated.
is it holy water?
I can bless it if you'd like.
Go ahead, I'd appreciate it. Okay, thank you. So, thank you very much. So, see, you guys need to be nice to her. She can bless your water for you, too. All right. So, all right. So now as we consider, again, consider the argument here for traducianism and Christology and how this stuff works. Again, think about it. In Adam and Eve, see, what you have is without the normal means of generating a new human being, you've got woman from man, okay? But what happens in the incarnation and the virgin conception of Christ? You have man from woman, okay? It's actually, so the last Adam is man from woman. So that's the sort of the parallel theological issue going on here. But there's also other instances where can you have new human beings without having the normal means of generation, sperm and egg, and I won't go into any more details than that. You can figure the rest out for yourself. But yes, the idea of monozygotic twins. Okay. Again, the sperm and egg come together, you form the gamete, and then within the first, I've got the exact number, 7 to 14 days, while these cells are replicating, then all of a sudden they can split off. And what do you have? You have a biologically identical human being. So the question is, well, where does the twin, or from whom does the twin get his or her soul? And tradition says, well, that's easy. Basically, if you've got soul and body together, the moment they split, simply one gets his soul from the full human nature. So it would have intellect, will, and emotions. So, now you have another self-aware being. Or a creationist would say, no problem. When you have one body, so to speak, that's being produced, and one soul attached to it, if God intends that this one splits off, God just creates a new soul immediately and directly and unites it with the body. That's why it continues to replicate, and you've got two persons. So in either case, you can account for monozygotic twins. The idea you have one zygote, the full, human chromosome count and so forth. But so from one zygote, you get two persons in the end. So monozygotic twins, which, again, either way, the incarnation is a miracle. But the fact that, how do you do virgin conception? Well, monozygotic twins was Jesus, in fact, a twin of Mary with the XXXY chromosome structure changed. In other words, look, he got his human nature from Mary. Joseph wasn't involved in it. So it would still take a miracle for God to change the male versus female structure to it, and at the same time to generate a human nature from that. But at least that would be a quote plausible understanding of how the virgin conception would happen with the person of Christ. So there's all sorts of theories. Well, maybe God created a sperm, and united it with Mary. Well, the problem is that if God ex nihilo creates a sperm, then Jesus isn't really fully part of our human race. He's only half part of our human race, and you've got some other human sperm, that is now, he's a hybrid now of two different human races, instead of actually being in the line of Adam and in the line of David. And so he can't be the last Adam, and he can't take the throne of David because he's not really part of our race. There's all sorts of other qualifications that go along with that. So here we think about traducianism versus creationism. So again, the point is, look, arguments in support of this theory. God breathed only once into man's nostrils and then left it to mankind to propagate the race. Nothing said about Eve's soul. Her soul must have been included in Adam's. Another big argument for traducianism is this: doesn't it say with respect to God's creative work, that ex nihilo creative work, he rested on the seventh day? Okay, well, are we still in the seventh day? Yeah. There's a Sabbath. The argument is that God's still in his ex nihilo creative Sabbath. that we don't see any more creation going on, yet it wouldn't be the seventh day anymore if God is doing new ex nihilo creation, according to the traducianist. And, of course, number of passages in the Old Testament. In fact, this is the argument that is made in the book of Hebrews, chapters 7 and 8, that Christ's priesthood, as his Melchizedek priesthood, is greater than the Aaronic priesthood. Why? Because he gives the argument that Aaron, or Levi, as he bowed down to Melchizedek while he was still in the loins of his father Abraham. So the idea is that descendants are considered to be still somehow in the loins of their parents. Although they're unindividuated, they're not a bunch of little people going, let me out, right? But the Hebrew conception here is you have unindividuated personhood or descendants in the loins of their fathers. And that's an argument that is actually made for the greater Melchizedek priesthood, is that Aaron actually bows down to Melchizedek through the loins of Abraham. So anyway, how do you account for inherited family traits? How do you account for moral depravity? See, that becomes the issue. And so now on the depravity issue, I want to spend a couple of minutes on this, because this is where some people think this is the great strength of traducianism. And actually, the Shed uses this argument as well. I want to give a counter-argument on how I think that the creationists can sufficiently account for inherited moral depravity as well. And in this case, we'll get to this, but what's the basic problem that we have with human nature after the fall? And it's this. It's the heart. Okay? Jeremiah 17:9, the heart of man is evil and incurably sick. Who can understand it? Matthew 15 through 20, Jesus says, out of the heart comes evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, thefts, fornications, thefts, false witnesses. So, see, our basic problem with our nature is we have a bad heart, okay? And that's why the promise of the new covenant in Ezekiel 36 ultimately says God's going to change our nature, okay? That what you see in the changing of our nature as it's promised, he says, I will sprinkle clean water on them and they will be clean. I will remove their heart of flesh, or their heart of stone, and give them a heart of flesh. I will put my spirit within them and cause them to walk in my statutes. So the idea of a new heart is the core to understanding regeneration in the Christian. So what is the heart? And again, just for the sake of time, I'd like to develop this, but you actually look up in the New Testament lexicon the Greek word cardia, okay, where we get the word cardiac, okay, the heart. And there's multiple references to the heart, because your heart is essentially who you are. And it's the core of your being, it's your core orientation. And according to the Bible, you either have a good heart or a bad heart, okay? It's an evil heart or it's a good heart. And the good heart is oriented to want the things of God, want righteousness. And the bad heart is selfish. It's self-centered. It's the heart curved in on itself is the basic problem with sin. So you have this reflexive orientation of the heart. You're self-centered, okay? Now, as you look at the lexical definitions of the heart, you'll see just constantly it says, well, it's the seat of the intellect, or it's the seat of the will, or the foundation of the intellect or the will. You always see it's something that's prior to the intellect and the will. It's a governing or orienting influence. So what does that mean? Well, if this is your basic orientation, you're either going to be Godwardly oriented or you're going to be selfishly oriented. Well, if you're selfishly oriented, now from here, your powers or capacities of the soul, thinking, choosing, and feeling, grounded in your capacities of intellect, will, and emotion, what are you thinking about? What do you want to think about? See, if you're selfish and want to please yourself, you think about not pleasing God, And what do I want at any given moment? So the ground of sin is going to be this. And this is this is basically the core of what we talk about as depravity or original sin, which is the reflexively oriented heart produces concupiscence. That's a theological term. In the Latin word, concupiscence just means strong desire. But in this context, it means the strong desire to sin and serve yourself. Okay? Now, from that strong desire to sin and serve yourself, you think and choose accordingly. Okay? So this is why, now, how do you go from a bad heart to a good heart or a good heart to a bad heart? Okay? And that's the real question, because the great part, and we're going to get to this when we get to sin, salvation, is to understand this. There are three basic problems that we have because of sin. And those are pretty simple. We're guilty, we're alienated, and we are corrupt. Okay? Three basic problems that we have as a result of the fall. The first two are statuses that we have. It's a relation that we have to God. We're not right with respect to God's moral governance. We're guilty. We've broken the law. We're alienated. We don't have a status of enjoying direct, loving fellowship with God. We're alienated from the affections of God. Okay? And then corrupt. Our very nature is such where we want to sin and we don't want holiness and righteousness and love, in the sense that we're going to admit we're sinners and want to seek it. So those are the basic problems that need to be fixed in mankind, which, here's your systematic theology. So we'll get into law and justice and what that means in our doctrine of sin issue or section. But bottom line is, because of the fall, we're left guilty, alienated, and corrupt, and there's nothing we can do about it, because salvation can't come through the works of the law. So what do we need? A Savior. So Christ does the work, which again, he's the offended party that bears the harm that we've caused to the God-human relationship. And so now that he's borne the penalty for sin, made salvation available, when we receive salvation, what's fixed? Instead of being guilty, now we are justified. We're declared righteous. Instead of being alienated, we are adopted as children of God. And instead of being corrupt, we are regenerated. These are the three basic fixes to our three basic problems that we have theologically. And these are what get fleshed out in Scripture. Now we have a right status before God's moral bar of justice. We're declared right. Now we're children of God. God is loving us and mentoring us again. And he gives us a nature by which we can actually live that life. Okay? So those are the three fixes. So now we can just stop and go home, because now we're done with everything. Now you know what we're going to do, right? But that's the big picture stuff. This is what you want in place. So you know when you're reading any part of Scripture or systematic theology, where are we going with this stuff? Okay? And ultimately, we're going to see here, in the fall, this was instantaneous. Okay? All of a sudden, we're guilty, alienated, relationships broken. Okay? You're guilty, alienated, and corrupt. And this is also instantaneous. It's fixed. Okay? We'll talk about the progressive stuff. Sanctification, real sanctification is progressive, but this stuff is instantaneous. Okay? We'll talk about that in a minute, but so now back to the heart. The heart of man is evil and incurably sick, yet God says he's going to give us a new heart. Okay. So here's the argument, is that, what did Adam and Eve have in the garden that they didn't have afterwards? The answer is they walked with God. Well, how do they do that? Well, because they had a right relation to God. And for us to walk with God, we already know what that means. God's manifesting his relational presence in our life. So when you can argue that Adam and Eve were indwelt by God, their hearts were right. Okay? So they were Godwardly oriented. Okay? They wanted the things of God. They knew these things. When they sinned, what happened? Judicially, God withdrew his presence, with the result that now the heart's curved in on itself. Spiritual death, the result of spiritual death, is the heart curved in on itself. Spiritual death, again, we covered this on Saturday. Man, we talked about presence, illocal presence, local presence, repletive presence, all of those things, is that God now withdraws his relational presence. There's no activity of fellowship going on. Well, what's the result of that? The heart curved in on itself. All right, so we think about, all right, well, when do we get our new heart? What does it mean to be a, quote, new creation in Christ? Well, it's exactly what's being fixed. See, the result of God, of spiritual life, and God manifesting his presence in our life again is what? Now, that union of spiritual life results in a reorientation of the heart. You are now what? You're now a new creation. You're regenerated. You have new life. You have a, as the Ezekiel 36 says, now you have a new heart. Okay? So, but it's not that, you had to cut the old one out and do a transplant. It's just a reorientation of the core of your nature. That's why, as a believer, what do? The mark of a true Christian is you hate your sin. And you hate it because you know it displeases God. The unbeliever hates, sin because it causes problems in their life. But we know if we have the Spirit and a new heart, what do? We do the things we don't want to do, and we don't do the things we want to do. Okay? Now, the idea of the wanting of it is this. I do the things I don't want to do because I want to please God. So that's the problem. Now, why do you do it? Because you have a new heart, but you have a whole lot of dispositional knowledge that is part of you. In other words, your memories, what you believe. God doesn't hit the reformat button on the human soul in regeneration. So you might get a reoriented heart, but God doesn't hit the button, do a low-level format, erase Microsoft Satan 6.66 and install Microsoft God 7.77. Okay, wouldn't it be nice if he did? The point is, you have lived your entire life learning how to live apart from God. And that's part of your active consciousness, it's part of your subconsciousness. And so what you got to do, but that's where the conflict is now. You have a new heart, but what are you supposed to do for the rest of your life? Progressive sanctification is what? Sanctify them in the truth. Thy word is truth. We all believe a whole bunch of lies about what really is pleasing to God, what brings joy in life. So your entire rest of your life is to really want holiness and to confront your lies and make a choice to believe what's true and enjoy it. But it doesn't happen automatically. You have to seek it, you have to want it, you have to confront the lies, and you got to make a conscious choice to reject the lie and believe the truth. But that's the difference between instantaneously having a new heart versus having instantaneous sanctification. Okay? Because we still believe tons of lies. So if the life of the mind is not primary in the Christian life, you'll never fully address the lies. Never. True sanctification, true worship starts with truth. So unless you love the truth, again, know the truth and the truth will set you free. We're still in bondage to sin because we believe lies. Okay? You still have those, recurring, repeating sins. Also, why? You still believe the lie that that's what's acceptable or pleasing to do at that given time. So that's why you got to retrain your mind. You got to do that, and it's something that has to be active, habituated. It doesn't happen automatically. Because again, you tell me, how many people have sat in church, 20, 30, 40 years, and they haven't gotten any more holy? So, having a sermon go in one ear and out the other doesn't actually result in repentance and a true changing of the mind. So it's something you really got to, tell yourself the truth, choose to believe it, and choose to act on it. and you want a new habit, which is what we want to reorient our souls, you have to rehabituate your soul to godliness, which means you got to repeat, make it repetitive. Stay away from the sin and rehabitualize your soul. And by the way, if some basic counseling stuff, if you've never done this, some basic rules in counseling. Never feel your way into doing, do your way into feeling. Okay? Whether you feel like it or not, so what? Just choose to do it. And the more you strengthen the will, like working out, right? I don't feel, get up and go, okay? Because guess what? If you're out of shape, you're never going to feel like going to work out, okay? So you'll never get back in shape. So you do your way into feeling. It's going to be hard at first, but then it gets easier. And the same thing with dealing with a sin in your life. It's going to be hard at first, but that's why we need the Spirit. God, convict me, move me, give me a swift kick in the rear end to get me up and, move in the new direction. So
is the counter argument then that ex nihilo, our souls are pure, but we still are born into a broken body?
I'm moving to that, so hold on to that. How does the soul get corrupt? Because remember, the traditionist says, well, if God's directly and immediately creating a soul, and we're sinful from the moment of conception, then it must be God directly creating a soul that somehow has this defect. Well, once you've identified the defect, it's simply the core of your being that is curved in on itself. It's not that God puts propositions there saying it's okay to sin or something like that. So how do you account for that? Well, so God creates you, your soul, apart from himself. Well, if creationism, again, if the absence of God's fellowship and spiritual life results in this heart curved in on itself and concupiscence, then it's actually pretty simple to account for this in the with creationism. It's simply God creates directly and immediately a soul, which is good. But again, in the process, the moment he sort of, immediately stops creating and it's left to itself, what's the orientation going to be? The next logical moment, it's going to be curved in on itself, even though God didn't create it that way. So, no problem. You're accounting for depravity, even with ex nihilo creation of the soul, which now, I think it's an overwhelming case that can be made that it's the presence of God that reorients our heart, because Ezekiel 36 is clear, I will put my spirit within them and cause them to walk in my statutes. I will give them a new heart. So it seems to be it's the absence of God that orients our heart one way, and the presence of divine activity of fellowship that gives us this, or the union that we have with God that orients our heart in the right direction. Well, now, how did Jesus have a sinless nature from the moment of conception? Well, that's actually quite easy to explain. For example, if we're indwelt by the Spirit of God and that reorients our heart, this is a fortiori to the greater argument. How much more does a hypostatic union of a divine and human nature orient the human nature to God? See, if we're merely indwelt by God and that orients our heart to God, then from the moment of conception, the Logos is simply taking a piece of human nature from Mary, but it's permanently united to the divine nature. Talk about, that's a greater union than an indwelling union that we have. Being baptized with the Holy Spirit. So Christ's heart, human heart, would always simply be Godwardly oriented. He wouldn't inherit concupiscence. Okay? So in other words, if we get a new heart by being merely indwelt by God, how much more does a greater union, the hypostatic union, produce a Godwardly oriented heart? Okay? So you want to account for the sinlessness of Christ, that's sufficient in and of itself. It's simply the union that produces it. Okay. Well, that's my theory. I need to write an article on this. I haven't read anybody that actually has written on this yet, but, makes perfect sense to me. So that's that's a little bit, we think about union and orientation and how all that stuff works. So that's why, again, while Shedd makes a sort of a lot to do about traducianism and its effect of accounting for sin and all of that, and the problems with creationism, I think that this alone can account for, again, the sinlessness of Christ and all the other issues going on there. So like I said, on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I'm a creationist. Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, I'm a traducianist. It does seem to indicate that sin can be passed on better from a corrupt soul, and at the same time, real strong position of the metaphysical simplicity of the soul seems to indicate it's just not subject to real or essential division. So some of you are going, what? What? So I see that look. Well, lunch is in 10 minutes. Don't worry. So, but some of you are like, were you guys partying last night or something? Having apologetics parties. So, all right. Finish up something, nerds. So, all right, page 13, image of God. And a lot could be said about the image of God, but I want to give you some basics here. We think about the image of God in man. The two words there, image and likeness, simply mean, if you look at the Hebrew and Greek words there, it simply mean that we're similar to God and we represent God. Those are really just the two basic ideas that are communicated there. And so when we think about this, are we made in the image of God? Yeah. And it's reserved that, look, after God is done with all the beetles and snakes and gophers and squirrels and, all of a sudden we get to the end and now he makes man in the image of God. There's something distinct about us. And we see throughout the rest of scriptures, we're the only ones that are morally, at least on earth, not dealing with the angels, that we actually are punished, we're praised, we're blamed, we're rewarded, all these things. That we have these higher relationships with God in beauty and holiness. So there's something we have in our capacities that are greater and enable us to relate to God in the way we're designed to relate, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. So it's the idea that we are created in the image of God. Genesis 1:26 and 27 says, God created man in his image. Genesis 9:6, does it survive the fall? Yes. If you shed man's blood, by man your blood will be shed because he is in the image of God. So we retain the image of God after the fall. So the idea, the biblical usage is there in Ezekiel 23 and others. The whole point is that the words themselves, image and likeness, are representation and similarity. So now from there, a little bit on divine attributes. I talked about incommunicable and communicable attributes. What's an incommunicable attribute? It's an attribute that God can't give a creature. Okay? Things like self-existence, infinity, anything to do with infinity, absolute eternality. You can't give that to something that is limited, created, contingent, begins to exist, and so forth. Just can't. So a communicable attribute is something that God can give, something he has that God can give to a creature in a limited way. So things like the capacity for justice, love, mercy, holiness, those things. Those are things that can be reflected in human nature. So we talk about this, the ontological image versus the functional image of God. And I've done this in again, ECD1 and other classes, but does it make a difference whether you've got three persons or one person. We talked about, Unitarianism and versus Trinitarianism. Yeah, three persons versus one person who is God. And now in the ontological image, if the idea is God making us as much like him as possible as a person, well, probably the Unitarian and the Trinitarian would agree probably on the ontological image mostly. You might have a few nuances, but so we're as much like God as we could be, okay, and yet still be created. In fact, a way to understand it is if, let's say we have a finite mirror and we turn around and reflected it at God, what would reflect in this limited mirror? It'd look like a human being, okay? We're everything that God could give us and still be created, okay? Why? Because, again, ontological image, why did God create us with these capacities? Well, we get into our purpose for existing, which is pretty clear. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. That's why we exist. So why do we exist? To mirror the intra-Trinitarian love relationship. Okay? That's why God created us. And Unitarian view. Okay? What's the functional image of God? What are we supposed to be imitating? Well, here it's love relationships, but you need you need more than one person to have a love relationship. Okay? Self-esteem doesn't cut it here. God is really happy with himself and all that. So, see, the idea of self-esteem or something of that sort, that's not really it. But see, we see, for example, that God created us. It says male and female in his image. So single image, male and female. The complementarian nature of the image of God. We're designed to complement or complete each other in loving fellowship. Okay? And, and that's why some would argue based on reason alone we can get the Trinity. For example, that if love is the highest virtue, which God says it is, then naturally you would have three and only three persons in a state of perfection. For example, the idea of love isn't going to be complete unless you've got at least one other person. So there's an eternal, essential generation of a second person to love, and yet the two persons want to do what? Share their love with someone else. Okay, and then you get the third person generated that proceeds from that loving union. Now adding a fourth wouldn't add anything to the types of love that are involved. So there'd be the perfected states of a loving being. So now, while that's not a deductive argument, it's not with tautological certainty, it's a good way to try and understand, look, if God is this way, we'd probably have three persons. But interestingly enough, God created human families from the beginning. It's not good for man to be alone. So what do? We complete our love with someone else, and we produce our own offspring and our families to share that love. So you want to be careful about analogies like that, but that seems to go just fine with the doctrine of the Trinity and what it means to imitate God. We love God. We're loving in community and in the most intimate ways. Unitarians, like I said, by this all men will know that you're my disciples, that you have lots of degrees and read the latest scholastic journal. Okay, whereas opposed, what's for us, by this all men will know you're my disciples, that you have love for one another. Okay, so the highest virtue, in the sense what God creates us for, is moral righteousness. And some people want to understand, how does God's law and holiness and all of that relate to love? Well, as an attribute, having an affection for someone and wanting their happiness, it's actually pretty simple to understand. Law regulates what love is. Okay. If you love someone, you won't kill them, you won't rape them, you won't steal their stuff, you won't do that. So that's what it means to be loving. It'll say what you should do and what you shouldn't do as a person. So the divine law, which comes from the divine holiness, is just the regulative principle of the divine love. Okay, so how do you act with kind affection towards someone? So that's a notion of loving kindness there. So ontological image would simply be that, again, how are we similar to a divine person? And that God would have to make us enough like himself for us to be able to have that relationship with him. So where do we ground the image of God? And as I mentioned in the we talked about trichotomy and sort of answers. See, we don't have to have a separate substance that gives us these capacities distinct from animals. I talked about this in ECD1 as well. If we think of these as grounded in capacities of the intellect, and we conceive of the intellect, for example, as a power and an ability that has subcapacities with it, okay? For example, let's say human versus lower animal. Human has a capacity to be self-aware. Well, dogs have a capacity to be self-aware. They know they're not their dog food bowl, okay? Something like that. Or the capacity to recognize their physical needs. They can have a physical mode of sensation, okay? Dog knows that he can, is aware there's a plate of bacon in front of him, right? So the point is, eventually we can look at the similarities between someone made in the image of God and a being or thing not made in the image of God. There are going to be some parallels, just as if we put a divine intellect here, there are going to be some parallels between that and a human, but there are clearly going to be some things that are not parallel in what they have with respect to capacity. So now you get to things like second order awareness or thought, okay? While dogs can think about eating the bacon, see, we can think about the thought to eat the bacon and say, well, but should we eat the bacon, okay? Of course, the answer is yes, but that's the, that obviously. We think about, aesthetics, beauty. Again, what do we love? We crave beauty, okay? In fact, the very notion of what attractiveness is has to do with beauty. And there's physical beauty, there's spiritual beauty, there's all sorts of ways we think of beauty, but beauty equals attractiveness. And basically anything that's not beautiful is not attractive, okay? So that's why we have layers of what we consider beauty. So, what's an attractive building? Well, architects, create all sorts of things to make a building attractive. So, as I said, beavers, see, all of a sudden we're going to have these other things, the idea for moral thought. Beavers can build dams, but they don't build dams with bay windows, French doors, and things like that. Unless it's the Chronicles of Narnia and Mr. Beaver. Okay, so the point is, look, at some point, we have a better quality soul with these additional capacities to recognize instances of morality, instances of beauty, to create instances of beauty and morality. So you have to have a capacity or power to do something to produce an effect that's beauty, that's moral, that's something like that. So that's what's going to those are the capacities. And as I said, why we can say we're all created equal, because every human soul has these capacities. Question is how do we act on them? What's our learning? What do we do with it? That's the functional issue, not whether or not we have the capacity. So for that, I want to flesh this out. Then we'll break for lunch. But look at page 15. We'll end here for the day, or not for the day, for the morning session. No, you have to come back in the afternoon. So. By the way, you paid for this. You're cheering. You get to go. Man, just want to get your money's worth, and stay here till 4. So, page 15, we think about aspects or properties of the image of God. Clearly, we think about moral aspects of the image. We have an innate sense of right and wrong. Again, the whole idea too on there is that, look, Romans 2:14 and 15. The Gentiles do the things of the law, so it shows the law written on their hearts, their conscience bearing witness, okay? Again, so we recognize that murder is wrong, that rape is wrong, things like that. And so you want to argue for moral objectivism. Remember, for things like this, everybody recognizes the principle but not everybody applies the principle the same when it comes to the rule. So every moral principle has to be applied in a situation, a specific fact situation. And by the way, it's literally called the principle-rule distinction in ethics. And that's what the difference in law between a law and a judicial holding is that the judge applied that law to a specific set of facts. Okay? Same thing goes on in ethics. So when we think about this, how do you argue for moral objectivism? There's a number of ways to do that. But you just might want to note that murderers protest when people try to murder them in prison. So it's funny how they recognize the principle. Rapists, protest being raped in prison. Well, gee, I thought rape was okay. See, they recognize the principle, but what they want to do is create a set of facts where the principle doesn't apply to them. Okay. For example, this is why even some of the alleged instances where we, supposedly disagree on ethics, well, pro-abortion, pro-life, the two sides don't disagree on the principle. See, you talk to a pro-abortion person, you say, you think it's okay to murder innocent human persons? No. See, they would agree with the principle that it's wrong to take the life of another human being with premeditation, malice aforethought, without mitigation, justification, or excuse. They'd fully agree with that principle. But see, where do we differ? They don't think that the conceptus, the zygote, is a full human person, hence the rule doesn't apply, or the principle doesn't apply. And we do believe that this is a full human person, hence that rule applies. Okay? So that's why when you get past all these alleged disagreements, we find out we actually do agree on these principles. But it takes our work in ethics and arguing for moral objectivism is to learn how to flesh this stuff out. Two more things, and we got a break. Relational aspects of the image, spiritual aspects of the image. I'll say this. How about physical aspects of the image? I don't know. All I'll say for this is one thing that's clear as crystal is God is not a physical being. John 4:24, God is spirit. His very nature is spirit. Jesus says, spirit does not have flesh and bone. So what do you do with our bodies in the image of God? Just the real quick answer to that is God made our bodies sufficient to operate in our functional image of God on earth, to do moral things, to do creative things, to do all these things. See, that's why we walk upright. We have opposable thumbs. We have, we have stereoscopic vision. We're supposed to have, color vision. We have all these things designed as human beings to do what? To work out our capacities, spiritual, moral, creative, and every other way, in the physical world. So God created a body that's sufficient to do that. This is why, last thing here, and then we're done. All of these movies that come out where you have these squids and lobsters flying these high-tech spaceships, and that supposedly there's these advanced, races with all these, sorry, but to actually be able to create a circuit board takes a lot of precision, and squid arms don't do that. I mean, you're trying to solder a circuit board or something. Lobster claws and squids, don't have the precision, to be able to do that. So this is why we think about, what's the perfect form in the physical world that all of our abilities would take, and it's what we are. Okay. So that's why, also too, how do angels normally appear? Well, they look like human beings. So they'd also be, that's the perfect physical form for the display and use of these other aspects of the image. So that's the issue there. All right, let's break for lunch. All right, lunch is over. No, I'm going to all right. So, all right, see you back here at the appointed time.